y'all? Welcome to another episode of The Growth Blueprint. This is going to be our final installation of our introduction to the Core 4. In this one, we're going to be talking about the limbic system, about emotional regulation. I'm really excited for this one. This is, in school I minored in neuroscience, so I took a bunch of classes about the brain. And so the brain is like infinitely fascinating to me. So I'm pretty excited to talk about this one with all of y'all here today. But if you have no idea what I'm talking about, if you're new to the podcast, if you're new to my content, there's 3 episodes before this that are also going to be helpful for you to listen to. You don't have to listen to those beforehand, but make sure that you go back and find the other Core 4 episodes about movement, nutrition, and sleep. Because those are kind of our core 4 that we need to regulate and bring into balance so that we can live the kind of healthy, active lifestyle that we need to be living. And so, again, this is going to be our episode about emotional regulation, about our limbic system, about what's going on up here in our noggin in regards to physiologically controlling our body's stress and optimizing it to live a healthy, active lifestyle. So, without further ado, let's rock and roll into the limbic system. So, if you have been watching my content, you're familiar with this frame of reference that I like to use that I just call the hunter-gatherer frame of reference. And now, I didn't come up with this, but I love it, and I love using it, and the application is so widespread, it's so useful to use. But the limbic system is this part of our brain that you can see in the image right here. If you're just listening to this, the limbic system is a deep brain region. All right, and so because it's a deep brain region, the deeper something is in our brain, like literally from the surface going into our brain. The surface of our brain, our cerebral cortex, the wrinkly thing that you're familiar with seeing or associating with the brain, that's where a lot of our quote unquote, we call it higher functioning in the neuroscience kind of realm of stuff. And that's where our conscious kind of cognitive processing goes on. That's where your awareness sits. That's where your focus is. That's where, your higher order decision making comes from, our ability to kind of plan things out and look into the future. And that's kind of where all of that stuff comes from. It's on the surface. And so as you go deeper and deeper into the brain, we get less and less conscious of what's going on. Those things are a lot more automatic. Those are the things like the control over our breathing, over our heartbeat, over our hair growing, our digestion taking place, our liver being told what to do, all of that control, the control that just kind of like enables us to go through our day-to-day life not dying. That is control that's all done on deeper brain regions, right? It's not stuff that we're consciously aware of. We don't have to think about making our heart beat or think about taking a breath, although we can tell ourselves to breathe, right? We're not usually telling ourselves to breathe. And so the limbic system is one of these brain regions that sits deeper more in the subconscious arena of stuff that goes on within our brain. And because of that, that's part of why this makes it so interesting. But because it's a little bit deeper and it's not relegated to our wrinkly cerebral cortex, that's what we call the wrinkly part, our cerebral cortex, it's actually present in all mammals. All mammals have a limbic system. And so it's actually widespread amongst a lot of the animals that we see every single day. Squirrels, dogs, cats, all of these animals have this limbic system and have some form of emotional processing. They feel emotions to some extent. Of course, it's different. We don't know exactly what animals are feeling when they feel things, but they are feeling things, which I think is really, really interesting. And so our with that hunter-gatherer kind of frame of reference, right? If all mammals have it, then it goes without saying that our ancient ancestors had it as well. And if all mammals have it and our ancient ancestors had it as well, right? The arena, the world around us that our limbic system grew up in, right? That it was designed to function in is very different than the world that we see around us today. And the more that we can understand what's different from the way things used to be and the way things are today is that hunter-gatherer frame of reference. And it can be applied to many, many different things. And we're going to kind of apply that and look at things throughout the course of this entire episode. But first, I just want to talk a little bit about what the limbic system is. And so it's the part of our brain that takes incoming information, sensory information from our eyeballs, from our ears, from our nose, from our skin, all of our senses, okay? And it decides how to feel about it. If we need to react quickly to it, if it's safe, if it's dangerous, and how to remember that event, okay? And it links all of these things together into a memory, and it processes this and makes these things very, very sticky. And so back in the day, right, it was responsible for creating and taking memories and giving emotional context to things that like put us in physical danger, right? Life or death, right? A predator, lions, snakes, wolves, bears, stuff that's poisonous, stuff that's venomous, stuff that can cause us bodily harm. Enemy tribes, territorial disputes, falling from heights, unstable terrain, sudden loud noises, okay? It was our limbic system job to react instantly to these things, to these physical threats that we could find ourselves around. It was its job to respond to resource scarcity. You know, maybe we were running out of water, right? Or running out of food, or there was a storm coming, right? That was going to make it hard for us to find something, injury or illness, right? Not having any medicine. It was also responsible for social rejection or isolation. If you lived in a tribe of 15 people, right, and you all depended on one another, and you did something that got you kicked out of the tribe, you were gonna die, right? You weren't gonna be able to protect yourself, hunt, build shelter, gather food, all of these things to keep yourself alive, right? So it was responsible for kind of the social interactions of those kinds of things as well, because it was a life or death situation back then. And then of course, like disease and death, right? So rotting food, right? Sick tribe members, injury, contamination, again, poisonous things, venomous things, those things, again, disease and death. And then also uncertainty and unpredictability, right? New environments, unknown people, sudden changes in what was going on in the world around you, again, storms, right? Things that our brain couldn't immediately categorize into something that we had seen before, right? Uncertainty or unpredictability. And now all of these things more or less dealt with us either continuing to be alive and keep getting to do life, or dying, right? That was the purpose of the limbic system. And that's the purpose of the limbic system in all mammals, is it's to kind of take what it is that's going on, okay, all of this information, come in, take it in, process it, give an emotional context to this thing, and then store it as a memory and stick all of this stuff together. Okay, it's got six big things. It's emotion, behavior, motivation, long-term memory, olfaction, which is our nose, smelling, and our stress response. Those are the six. There are 6 different brain regions that are associated with the associated with the limbic system, and these are those 6 things. Okay, it's a cool example that is actually super pertinent. That's going to make this land for a lot of you. It's the part of our brain that's responsible for getting triggered. Okay, and so maybe you have some past trauma, and there are things that may not necessarily have anything to do with what happened, but that make you feel those emotions come up again, right? Maybe it's a color or a smell or the position of someone's body, a specific setting, right? Maybe it's a vehicle. Maybe it's all of these different contextual cues, right, that can elicit some kind of response. That's your limbic system in action. Another example that a lot of us probably have familiarity with is nostalgia, right? Maybe it's the smell of grandma's cooking, or the smell of your grandparents' house, or just the smell of them, right? It brings you immediately back to your childhood and fond memories probably, right? That again, that is your limbic system at work, okay? And so there's this big mismatch here between what our limbic system was designed to do and what it's doing today, right? We're not gonna die because of a predator or our angry neighbor, usually, right? People still get killed by predators, people still get killed by angry neighbors, but not all that often, right? I'm not concerned about my downstairs neighbor killing me. I'm not concerned about getting killed by a predator when I go for a walk later today, right? Those are not things that we have to worry about. We're also not going to starve to death, right? We're definitely not going to starve to death, right? We're not going to die because we're on our own and we can't fend for ourselves because we're a loner, right? Again, not going to happen. Disease and infection, that's not an immediate danger anymore for the vast majority of people, right? We're not going to, if we gash our arm, right, it's not even gonna get infected. And even if it did get infected, right, we're just gonna go get some antibiotics and that's not going to be a problem. If we eat something that was a little bit spoiled, you know, we're not going to die because of it, right? And uncertainty and unpredictability rarely, if ever, spell death for anyone nowadays, right? And so we've kind of solved all of the problems that our limbic system was designed to keep us aware of, that it grew up and was designed to do. But we still have a limbic system, and it's still doing what it was designed to do, but it doesn't have any of the old problems to deal with. And all of those old problems that it dealt with were designed to keep us from dying, right? We live in a very, very safe society these days, right? I mean, objectively speaking, right? The life expectancy has gone through the roof. You know, the life expectancy of like a hunter-gatherer was, I'm just spitballing here, but probably like 30 years old, maybe, if you were lucky, right? As soon as your physical abilities started to decline, if you weren't part of a successful tribe that could take care of you after you were out of your physical prime, you know, you were toast, right? You weren't gonna live much longer. But that's not a problem now, right? People are regularly living into their 90s. Almost everybody's living into their 80s, right? Lots of people are living into their hundreds, right? It's life and death now is a very different thing than life and death back when our limbic systems were keeping us alive. Our limbic system is not the thing keeping us alive these days, but it's trying to. And thus we have the conundrum that we find ourselves in. So if we have this part of our brain that, again, it's deeper, where it's subconscious, we're unaware of its activity, okay? And its job is to keep us from dying. And even if we're not going to die, it is still being vigilant of death-threatening things. What is it actually doing? I'm glad you asked. So now some of the most common, I guess, let's call them, I don't want to call them triggers, but the stuff in the modern world, in today's society, that is activating our limbic system in a negative way. Because again, we can activate our limbic system in a positive way. And this is, again, what we're going to talk about towards the end, is how do we actually control the reactions of our limbic system in a positive way, right? We have more control over it than a lot of people think that we do. But a good example is the example that I gave before, right? Where you may have traumatic things that are triggered, but we also have like fond things that can be triggered as well. It's because this is our limbic system. It's responsible for emotional context, for creating memories around that emotional context, and then deciding how we feel in the future when things trigger those memories. And so nowadays there are a variety of things that are programming our limbic system one way or another. And we're going to talk about those negative ones that cause us a lot of problems and hinder our ability to actually be successful in health and fitness, living a life full of peace, longevity, all of those kinds of things. And so, you know, our first one is social media and kind of the internet that we have right now, right? There's constant comparison. I'm sure if you're listening to this, obviously you have some form of social media. And so, you know, think about the times where you're on social media and it makes you feel badly, right? Well, if you're on social media and it makes you feel badly, your limbic system is going to pick up on that, and it's going to take that emotional context, and it's going to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And so you can have this negative loop of comparing yourself to others, right? Feeling like you're not good enough, seeing other people's lives, and maybe you're criticizing other people's lives. Maybe you're bullying in silent up in your brain, right? There's all of these things with social media and being online that are going to activate our limbic system in a negative manner. Financial stress, right? That's a huge one. Again, it's not even necessarily life and death, right? Because you're probably not going to die. The worst that's going to happen is you end up homeless, but you're still alive, right? And if you live in the United States, like, I don't know, I mean, you probably have family members that can even help take care of you if something bad happens. We have a social safety net of sorts in the United States, but again, it doesn't prevent me from being stressed about finances. I have family members that, the worst thing that happens to me is I end up living with a family member for a little bit, but that does not prevent my financial stress. So financial stress is something that's going to activate our limbic system. And financial stress is a new thing, right? It didn't exist back in hunter-gatherer times, but it is a thing that we deal with nonetheless, right? Maybe this is an email from your landlord or from your bank or from your credit card company. These things, bang, trigger that emotional response, okay? Maybe we're just, another one is just like information overload, right? Again, kind of back to the internet and social media, notifications on your phone, right? Getting messages, seeing likes, seeing comments, reading the news, right? There's just so much information. There's too much information for our brains to understand and process, right? Our brains, and our whole brain, not even just our limbic system, but our whole brain was designed to deal with a much, much smaller amount of information, right? If you lived in a tribe of 25 or 30 people, that was your whole world, right? You didn't even know that there was another continent, right? You didn't even know that the land that you were on stretched for 3,000 miles in that direction, right? Your world was very small. The amount of information that you had to sift through and deal with and make sense of was so much smaller than the amount of information that we constantly have to deal with on a day-to-day basis today, right? And there's amazing things about that, but there's also really awful things about it, right? It's amazing that you're able to consume this podcast and hopefully learn something and take something from this, but it's a double-edged sword, right? Because there's so much other nonsense out there that we have to deal with. And as a consequence, this is going to activate our limbic system because there's going to be so much incoming information that we just don't know what to do with it. Our limbic system is not designed to handle that stuff, right? Work pressure, deadlines, right? Coworkers, work in general, right? Again, if we think about the hunter-gatherer frame of reference, your to-do list was probably pretty small, right? If you were a mom that just had a child, maybe your responsibility was like to clean some stuff up, and maybe like make some food and like take care of maybe a handful of other children with a couple other mothers. But like that was it. If you were a guy, it was like maybe make sure that the women and children are cool and then go collect some berries and go hunt for stuff, right? At the most, maybe the most stressful that a situation got was, an incoming tribe and you had to pick stuff up and move. Right? It was our limbic system in our brain was designed to deal with those things, not to deal with coworkers that you don't get along with, not to deal with mean comments at work or a boss that's a pain in the ass, right? It wasn't designed for this stuff that we deal with in everyday life. It wasn't designed to compare us to other people, right? We used to exist as a unit, a cohesive unit of small people, right? It's amazing the amount of stuff that we find ourselves having to deal with in today's society that we're not equipped to deal with is immense. And this is the big disconnect because we have a limbic system that was designed to function through those things that we talked about, right? The physical dangers, the life and death stuff, like getting killed, right, or gravely injured, running out of food and water, getting kicked out of the tribe, which means you're going to die, right? Getting a disease or an infection that's going to kill you, and finding yourself in an uncertain situation that could spell out death, right? None of those things exist in today's society, but our limbic system is latched on to these other things in the modern world that are not going to kill us, but our limbic system doesn't know the difference. And this is the problem, because it is, again, a subconscious brain region. It's deep within our brain that we don't necessarily have control over the immediacy of how it decides to respond. And the longer that we let it respond incorrectly, the harder and harder it is to get ourselves out of this cycle, okay? It's very, very difficult. You know, we're touching on this whole kind of idea of habits right now, and that is intentional because that's kind of how our limbic system works, right? If we went out and we found an area, a grassland, let's call it like an oasis, right? Where maybe it's pretty scarce outside of it, but we stumble upon an oasis. And there's lots of animals, there's lots of food to eat, it's a safe haven, right? Our limbic system's gonna go, yes, this is good, come back to here. It's gonna give lots of good emotions and lots of good context for that, so that next time we see maybe lots of trees, our brain's gonna go, hey, it might be one of those things again, right? And in the same manner, if we experience something negative, it's going to get us to avert away from that, right? Because again, it's life and death. It's black and white with our limbic system. It's black and white. That's what you really need to understand here, is that our limbic system operates as black and white, good and bad, life and death, okay? But we do not live in a world that is black and white, good and bad, life and death. Things exist on a spectrum now, okay? And this is where we really have to start to get into the habit of controlling and regulating this limbic system so that we're not just activated all the time, okay? Because we have a natural proclivity to go negative, because again, back when we were hunter-gatherers, the safe assumption was to just always predict the negative outcome, because the negative outcome was death. And if you were just thinking that you were going to die all the time, you probably stayed alive for the most part, right? It's why we didn't walk into the dark cave in the middle of the night. It's like, duh, we wouldn't do that now, right? And they didn't do it then, and that's why we're here, right? And so, you know, we have to understand that this is the way that our brain functions, so that we can start to understand how we actually can learn to control some of our responses to these things so that we can calm down. Because that's all we really need to do, is just calm down a little bit, okay? Because all that stuff we talked about with the modern world, they're very low stakes. We're not gonna die, okay? They're not like great things that could happen, like going broke or going bankrupt or like getting in a tiff with your neighbor, you know, or getting fired from your job. Like, these things aren't great, but you're probably not gonna die because it happened. And this is the issue, right? Unless we can learn how to control this, we're gonna be perpetually heightened, activated, stress, anxiety, and that's not only bad for our health long term, okay, but it steals your peace, it's gonna steal your motivation, and it's gonna make doing what's good for you and focusing on a positive future so much harder, okay? So now I wanna talk about what we can actually do to help regulate our limbic system, okay? So one of my favorite practices that I tell everybody to do is to do you can call it meditation. I don't necessarily like calling it meditation because that's kind of woo-woo, and you know, sometimes people stick their nose up at stuff like that. But really what it is it's just a brain training activity, okay? And so what you do is you just set a timer on your phone for like 20 minutes and just put it across the room, put it on Do Not Disturb so it's not buzzing and dinging and all that kind of stuff, but just start a timer, put it across the room, and then sit there and close your eyes and just pick a small phrase. I pick a Bible verse. I like to just repeat a small Bible verse, but you just sit there and you just go over this phrase in your mind, okay? And inevitably what happens is your brain decides to go chase an idea or a thought or a feeling, okay? And it's gonna go chase this thing. And typically what's gonna happen is you're going to get anxious and you're gonna get worked up and you're gonna get uncomfortable. And then you're gonna realize that you're not doing what you sat down to do, which is focus on a phrase. And so then you're going to realize that, and then you come back to your phrase and you repeat the phrase and you come back, and then you're going to chase something again and you're going to come back and you're going to repeat the phrase, you're going to chase something again, you're going to come back, you're going to repeat the phrase. And what you're doing here is you're practicing awareness of when your limbic system gets activated, okay? So that in the future, right, after doing this for several weeks, in the moment, right, when you realize when something triggers you and you start to have an emotional response, you start to have a stress response, you can become aware of that. And in that moment, you become aware of it, you can say, hey, I just noticed that my brain was doing the thing, right? And you can say, oh, it's doing the thing. What am I going to do about that? And so in that moment, we get to then decide what we want to do. Okay, and this is a really powerful technique that we can use. Other things that are going to be super, super good for us is moving, right? We're going to run into a lot of the core 4 stuff, movement, nutrition, sleep, but moving is going to be good for our limbic system. Why? Well, because our hunter-gatherer ancestors did lots of moving, right? Our limbic system was designed to have lots of movement going on in our day-to-day life. Some other stuff that can be really, really good for us is heat and cold, extremes like that, stuff that pushes us out of our comfort zone in a way that's not dangerous to us, but that makes us uncomfortable. Because what's going to happen is, again, what we're doing is we're training our body and our mind to understand that this feeling of uncomfortableness does not mean death. And because it does not mean death, we don't need to just go from 0 to 100 at the drop of a hat and get all revved up for no reason. Okay? Sunlight, natural circadian rhythm processing, right? Coming back to our sleep, right? Sunlight in the morning, going to bed on a consistent sleep and wake schedule, regularity, okay? If you think about your animals, right? If you have pets, if you don't have pets, you can think about your kids, right? They thrive on a structured framework of consistency, right? Eating at the same time, consistent bedtimes, this structure is really good for them. And it's really good for us too, because that's the way that our brains work. And if you want to have a regulated nervous system, having consistency and regularity is really, really important. Another big one is connecting with individuals, and not just like going out and drinking with your friends, but having like meaningful connection with other individuals, right? Again, if you're in a tribe of 25, 30 people and you spend your entire life with those people, that's pretty tight-knit, right? Most of us today are not that close with anyone in our life, right? We do not live with our parents or our grandparents or our children. And we probably never will, right? If you don't live with your kids anymore, it's you and your spouse for the rest of your life, like that, right? We don't have the level of connection and community that we used to have, right? And so being intentional about that, something that I've been really intentional about over the last month or so is as I put together a men's group, okay? And there's about 10 of us that just meet to be together and talk to one another and try to grow together, right? This meaningful connection with other human beings. And I'll tell you what, after our meetings, I feel absolutely amazing. And I feel so fired up and so peaceful and so motivated, okay? Again, this kind of goes with the community aspect of things, but expressing your feelings, expressing your emotion, okay? Because again, like if you existed in a community that was so tight-knit and you spent your life with the same 30 people, right, every single day, you would talk about stuff. You would get to work through things together, right? You wouldn't be bottling things up, holding things down, shoving stuff down, suppressing yourself. You would be sharing this stuff, sharing it with other people, and you would be getting their help working through things and regulating stuff and going through life together, right? And I'm sure that these things probably sound uncomfortable to some of you, which is a good thing, because that's kind of your indicator, right, of new and uncertainty. And so this is kind of an interesting caveat to this whole thing, is that as you start to do some of these things, your limbic system isn't going to want you to do them, because you've trained it to not want those things. You've trained it to find safety in the anxiety that you live in, which is an interesting thing to be in, right? And so as you go through this, you need to understand that your limbic system, your nervous system, has been trained to behave a specific way. And so you need to train it to behave a different way. If you want to be more regulated, have more peace, be able to focus better, and not be so wound up all the time, okay? This is the core of emotional regulation. And it's difficult, it's very hard, because everybody's also very different, because what activates you and what gets you worked up is going to be different than what activates me and gets me all worked up, right? And it's the same thing with nutrition and movement and sleep, is there's no one size fits all solution to this stuff, which is why I gave you a whole bunch of things that you can try, right? Because what might work for me might not work for you. But the point is that if you are not actively trying to regulate and teach your brain how to respond to what's going on around you, it is going to choose to respond negatively, because in the past, a choice to respond negatively is what kept it alive. But you're not going to die. You're not going to die. And so unless you're controlling it, your brain's going to pick the negative thing, and you're going to continually repeat these negative cycles that are going to make you feel like shit. They're going to make you sleep like shit, eat like shit, have no motivation, and be completely unregulated, right? And so you have to do this hard work of starting to notice those things, of practicing some of this stuff, of controlling your response. There's a great author. He was a psychologist that actually ended up in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And he wrote a book about his experience there, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he talks about the space between stimulus and response, and how we can have control over the space between stimulus and response. And by taking control of that space between stimulus and response and deciding how we want to respond to the things that happen around us, it gives us immense freedom. And his story is about how he learned through shoveling the bodies of the people that he loved out of the gas chambers and doing all kinds of horrific things and being witness to the horrific atrocities of Nazi Germany, how his control over the space between stimulus and response led to him having more freedom than even the guards had. And his story is about inspiring the guards and the people around them to understand themselves and understand their physiology and understand their brain, and by doing so to find hope and peace and meaning in their suffering. And he found that by controlling his limbic system, by teaching other people how to control their limbic systems. And hopefully you take some of this stuff and you start to make some progress on controlling your limbic system, so that you can start building off of the other core 4 aspects of your life and bringing those things together so that you can live a cohesive, peaceful, energetic, fit, and happy life, because that's what I want for you. So that's our episode on emotional regulation. As always, your time is your most valuable resource, and if you spent that with me today, I hope that I made it worth your time. And if you did, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate the show, follow the show, share it with someone that you think this could be useful for. Share it on social media, because that's the only way that this show grows, and that's the only way that more people get to grow and benefit from these things. So I would greatly appreciate that, and I will see y'all in the next one.